Okay, it's the third Android session in the Principles of Programming Graphical User Interfaces, and this time I have one demo program, which I won't be programming live, but describing what the program is and how it has been implemented. Okay, first look at this demo program, which I already have running here. It has a handful of different things. First of all, you can add these events into this application. I can type into name. I can select time of the event, and it appears in the list. I can sort the list by time or by date. Yeah, so there is this program, and you can add events and with name and time, and we can sort them. Well, actually they sort right now same way in both cases. They can be displayed. I can adjust the font, bold and italic, and choose between the main font families, serif, sans serif, and bold. And creation used a couple of dialogs, and one of the things implemented in this one, that when this dialog opens, I also made it so that the keyboard appears automatically, so that the user doesn't need to click on the text field to display the keyboard. And yeah, the sorting is with radio buttons. And then there is also this one image added here. And if you add enough events, this part with the image and the text, it should be scrolling vertically if you just drag it. So yeah, I won't be programming this live, but showing the different aspects of how it has been implemented. I started with the basic activity, so I have this activity main and content main in the layouts. And if we look at the content main, here what we have the image view component, which is the picture you saw. We have a text view, and there is a toolbar with the radio buttons. And if we look at the XML definition of this, which is relevant for two parts. First, it helps me show how it's implemented, and second, at this point, I couldn't create this layout using the graphical tools anymore. I had to code into the XML level because adding or managing, at least I couldn't put, for example, the radio buttons inside the correct way and the scroll view. So what we have here is a nested scroll view. So this is the scrollable part. So basically this area in here, and inside it is a linear layout. So scroll view and nested scroll view always must have just one child component. And if you drag the nested scroll view into the design view, you automatically get this linear layout as its child. So under that, I have added an image view and a text view. So they just go on top of each other. And for the image view, I have explicitly set the layout height. And you see that the image view doesn't have the actual image set here. It's set on the code. We will see later how that is done. And the text view doesn't have anything specific. I just have set the text size to be rather big one. So that's the nested scroll view. And the second component there is the toolbar, which I have dragged in there. And inside the toolbar, is a radio group. So always when you're using radio buttons, they should be inside a radio group. So that tells that these buttons work together and only one of them is active at the one time. And yeah, I haven't figured out how to actually do the radio buttons without going into this XML level, but it's quite easy here. Well, you can drag them into the interface first and then copy them around here so that you don't need to do everything by hand. And also on-click listeners, I have written them here, at least in my Android Studio. They don't even appear in the property editor for some reason. But you can just type them here and autofill works nicely. So that's basically the layout of that application. And as I said, I started with the basic layout. So this button comes from the basic layout and also the top toolbar. And yeah, when you just put the scroll view or nested scroll view, I believe the nested scroll view can be inside smaller components, while the scroll view should be full screen component. Adding this adds the scrolls, and you don't need to do anything else to enable that. I have a simple class here for the events, just name and time. The time is as a date object. And just simple getters and setters, and this was mostly generated, so I just created a new class and added the date and time there, and then there is this generate option there. There you can add automatically getters and setters, so you don't need to write code like this manually. Available in most integrated development environments. Other than that, I don't believe there is anything really special about this one. So the date class, if you are not yet familiar with in Java, it specifies one point in time, so both date and time, and actually in calendar independent way. Then I think we can, well, look at the menu. So I have the application menu here with the font and bold and italic, and there are these checkbox options here. In the design view, there is see if I can actually even show here, but there is this checkable option that you need to make true if you want those checkboxes to appear there, but you must manage those checkboxes manually. And this is basically when you get the basic activity, it already gives you the one item menu where you can expand or you can create a menu of your own. Now, if we start then looking at the main activity and how it looks like, I just go from the start. I have list of the events, the happening objects. Then I have one Boolean value for sorting, whether we are sorting by name or sorting by time. I have Boolean values for the bold and italic font. And then I have typeface, which remembers this information, whether we have serif, sans serif, or monospace font. And then in addition, I have one variable new name. And what it does is that when I add a new event, see what text we get. At this point, this new name variable contains that name I just typed. And then after I close the time selection dialog, at that point only is the new happening created. So if we first look at the onCreate method, it's mostly all this you get from the basic layout. Then there is one item which I look at this in the end. Hopefully I remember to look at it, how I'm using raw resource for one string, not a good example of that. There is the floating action button, which is part of the basic activity code. I don't think I do anything here manually. Here is the code where I take the image view, so this part of the interface, and set image resource to the image that is there. And the image is here. It's in the drawable section of the resources, and you can just drag and drop files into the resources. So I have just drag and drop the blocks in here, and then you can use it like that and set the image resource of an image view on runtime whenever you need to do that. Here I set the variables when the activity starts, so list the Boolean values and the font typeface, and this typeface is actually a kind of constant value in this typeface class. So in the beginning it's serif, and then I call method updateFont, which updates the font of this area. We will see it in a moment. Yeah, this onCreate options menu sets the menu. It comes from the basic activity pretty much directly. I think I changed the menu name, but you get that if you use basic activity for free, but we looked at that earlier. And on options menu selected reacts to the menu items. We have used that also before. Here I'm checking if the user clicked the font item. If so, I create a font dialog. We will look at that in a moment. I show the dialog and then return true. And if the user clicked bold or italic, so those checkbox buttons in the menu, I first check if it was checked at this moment. So this is the old value. It doesn't change automatically. The new value is the negative of that. If it was checked, the new value is false, and what was not, then it's true. I update the value of the menu item checked value. So you need to manually control to make it turn on and off. And then if it was italic, I set the italic variable, and otherwise it's the bold adjustment. I just that. And then I tell the font to update based on these two values. Then I have a couple of methods related to the dialogues. Well, onSetFont is called when the FontDialog selects a new font. So it just remembers this font and again calls this updateFont. And the updateFont is finally here. So first I get the text view, which is the big part here. Then the style is bold, italic, or normal. These are constant in the typeface class. It's a little bit messy code here, but I just use those two Boolean values, bold or italic, to find whether I want bold, italic, or normal typeface. And then events set typeface, and typeface has this method create, so I can create a new typeface, new kind of font, and I give it this typeface object, which, as you remember, on the initialization is also constant of the typeface class. So by default, I think it was serif. And it's updated here. The dialog, selection dialog, tells what the new value should be. And the second parameter is style. I'm not specifying the font size here, so the old font size stays, so other parameters which are not defined by this typeface stay the same. So this is what updates the font whenever I do some selection here. So I'm just calling the same method in every case. Then I have on name entered. So this is also called by the dialog, this case the name typing dialog. So I put this new name to have the name. And then here I activate the time picker dialog. And there is this existing class where you just create a new time picker dialog, give it the context, so the activity where it's called from, listener, which it should tell when the new time is selected, and then the initial values, hour, minute, and whether it should be 24-hour or 12-hour format. And then you just called show method on the time picker dialog. My variable name is perhaps not the best here. And then there is method onSetTime. So this is defined by the time picker dialog. This is what the time picker dialog now calls, because here I specified this as the callback listener. So it calls this method and it gives it tells about the time picker itself and then hour and minute that were selected. And the date object, as I mentioned, is calendar independent way of representing time, moment in time. And calendar is the class in Java which allows you to manage time in calendar specific ways. So I just called calendar get instance. It gives me the default type of calendar, which is the Gregorian calendar we are using, but there are other calendars in the world. Then I set the hour and I set the minute in there. And this actually, when I do this, by default, the calendar represents this very moment. So this is by the little bit funny thing happens in my application. There is also second in time. So this happens to be the second that the command was given, just a kind of side effect, but I decided not to clean it up at this point. So there is also day, which is today. And then I just add into the events this new happening, give the new name and time from the calendar. So getTime gives me date object. And then I call updateEventsText, which basically updates the text in the text view with all the events that we have. Then sorting. I have two methods, sort by name and sort by time. And if you look at the signature, you can see that these are made to be used in the onClick listener. So the onClick methods of the radio buttons have been set to point to these methods. So when I click sort by name, then this is called, and when I click this, the second one is called. So I just set the Boolean value and call updateEventsText. So updateEventsText also takes care of sorting. So here is the updateEventsText and the sort function. First, the updateEventsText calls the sort. And what the sort does is that if it's sort by name, it calls the sort method of the list class. And what the parameter is that you give there is a comparator. So comparator is, well, basically it's an interface which defines that it can compare two values. And the one method there is the public int compare. So we have the first happening and the second happening because it is been defined that it sorts happenings. And it just needs to return an integer, which should be 0 if they are the same, and +1, positive number or negative number. It can be just +1 or -1, or it can be any sort of number. So I just get the first event's name and compare it to name of the second event. So most of the default like string, for example, has this compare method, which already gives us this kind of integer. And I use the compare method of the time here. So depending on what is the sorting order, I just call the sort method of the list, and this sorts the list. So now the list is in the order that we wanted. Then I take the text view here in the update text. I first set the text to these events and a new line character, and then I just loop through the happenings and append the name of the event plus the time of the event. And to present the time, I'm using date format class. It has these factory methods for giving you these actual formatters, and I'm asking it to give me time instance, so this formats the time part of the date. And I ask it to format the time. You can give parameters here when you are creating a formatter or asking it to format if you want kind of short format or long format, and which parts of the display. So by adding some values, some additional parameters here, I could get rid of the second side, I believe. So that is basically most of the main activity. As said, there are small bits at some point I will come back to, and I will summarize this in the end. But there is questions at this point. I can of course explain. Yeah, so the calendar basically instead of constructor like saying new calendar, the calendar class has this static methods, and the most basic one is get calendar. Where is it now? Get instance, I think. So this gives us let me just see if I can get the documentation visible and get instance. So we're talking about, and we will talk about more about these locales later. So basically the calendar get instance, well, it returns calendar whose fields have been initialized to current date and time, and it also returns calendar matching the locale. So for me, it should be giving, I think, Finnish style formatting calendar, and well, actually it's not formatting the date format object is that, but basically the calendar we are using here. So the Gregorian calendar. Let's see it. We can look at the relevant parts here. So yeah, you can get the instance of the calendar using the default time zone and local. So you can also specify the time zone. You can specify the local, the time zone, or both of them if you want some specific calendar, specific time zone. Yeah, so basically get instance is what is kind of the recommended way when you need a calendar object, just go calendar.get instance, and that should, unless you definitely know that you need some sort of a calendar specific to some other country or some other time zone, then just using that usually gives you what you want. Okay, then I think we can look at a couple of dialogues we have in this application. First, there is this NameEntryDialog. This is very simple dialog using the extending the dialog fragment. And if you look at the onCreate dialog first, so I'm using the alert dialog builder like I have been using so far. I get the builder, set the title of the builder, so give new name. I set the view of the builder, and this is the layout I defined, so name entry. Here it only contains one text entry field with the ID new name field. And using the layout inflator, I just add that into the dialog. And then I set the positive button, and it calls the onNameEntered with the text that the user typed in. And then the negative button, which doesn't do anything. And then I just return with the builder create. So this is basically the minimum code that you can do to implement the dialogues using alert dialog builder, I believe. Well, of course, if you can go with just one button, then you can get rid of one of these items. And onNameEntered is the relevant part here. So this is how it tells back to the main activity what is the new name, and it follows this pattern recommended. So this NameEntryDialog defines an interface. I called it nameListener, and it has one method onNameEntered. I have one variable mListener here. It's, well, again, maybe not the best possible name, which is instance of this nameListener. And then here on attach, I just take the context given. So basically, this is the parent activity, and I assume that it implements this main nameListener context, nameListener interface. This interface defined here. And if we look at the main activity, we can see that it does that. So it implements, the main activity implements a handful of different listeners. It implements the NameEntryDialog's nameListener, time picker dialogs, on time set listener, and FontDialog's font selection listener. These first and last are interfaces I defined on my dialogs, and this time picker comes with the Android, and it follows the same pattern. Oops. And defines its own interface. So NameEntryDialog basically just calls that one method onNameEntered when the user clicks the OK button. And just finds the name field and gets the text from that and turns it into a string. And you can see here that the string is defined here, and it goes into that new name variable on the main activity. Then there is the second dialog I have defined, which is the font selection dialog. It uses the same basic things, also extends dialog fragment, defines its own font selection listener on FontSend, and here it, as a parameter, provides a typeface instance. It has the listener variable here, and similarly on attach, it takes the context and assumes that that is the listener. And onCreate dialog, I'm again using alert dialog builder, but a little bit differently in this case. So if we look at how that thing works, font selection dialog look like this. So it just have list of these 3 different fonts. I set the builder's title, but then I call the set items method of the builder. So the builder has tools for you to create these selection dialogs where there is list of objects where user can select one, or there is a mode where you can allow multiple selection as well. And what it takes as a parameter are an array of the values, and these are font names are in the resources, and then dialog interface on click listener. If we first look at the font names, where they are in the resources, they are here on the values, and I just added them here in the strings. So in the this XML format, you can add this string array type of thing, and you give it a name. So this font names name is here, telling that use that array, and then I just have their items, serif, sans serif, monospace. So from this resource file, we get these things in here. And then I have the on-click listener implemented of the dialog interface. So this is part of the Android library, and most of this was automatically implemented by the Android Studio. So there is basically one interface to implement, that's on-click, gets the dialog interface, and then it just gets an integer indicating which of the items was changed. So we get here in this case 0, 1, or 2, because they have 3 items. This is not perhaps the recommended way to do the comparison, but just for the sake of example, I'm here first getting actually the array to myself. So you can ask this get resources method in the activity level, I think are well basically available all the time, and there are different methods to get different kinds of resources for you, and one of them is get text array. You just give the name of the resource, and then you get an array of char sequence. Android likes to use this char sequence for all sorts of strings, and then you need to open convert them to string from that. But then I'm checking if this is the fonts, if the height index which I received from the listener is serif, then I call this on font set with the parameter typeface serif or typeface sans serif or typeface monospace. So from this dialog, the main activity gets the typeface object. And then there is just builder create, which returns the value returns the dialog. And that's also again quite reasonable amount of code to get the dialog implemented. So we have looked at the FontDialog, NameEntryDialog, Happening, and then was still one more thing I want to show, which is included in this one. And this again is something I added here for the sake of the example. Not something you should be doing, but something that in the exercises you are actually asked to do, or you need to do to use this to implement some of the exercises. So you can also create this raw type of resources. So in the raw resources, you can put anything, any kind of file can go into the raw resources, and then you can read them like you read any file. And so if you can pass, you have code to parse any binary format or text format file, you can just put it in the raw resources and read it from there, and the program is running. In the slides, I have explanation of how to create this raw folder, and as said, you can just drag and drop stuff here, or you can create also just create from here a GNU file, just a generic file. I have here actually a text file which has one word, happenings. So in the interface, actually this text comes from this raw resource, Obviously, in real life, you don't want to do that. You want to use the strings, the values, this file to contain all sort of text that goes into the interface. But for the sake of example here, in my main activity, here I'm reading the raw resource. So I'll again call get resources, and then there is method open raw resource, and I give it the parameter r.raw and raw title, so the file name raw title here, and it's the resources raw. And what it provides us is an input stream. So this is regular Java input stream, which you can use to read any sort of file. Since this is a text file, I create an input stream reader, giving the input stream and then the character set that, okay, it's ISO 8859-1 encoded text file. And then I wrap that into a buffered reader so that I can read it line by line. And then I just read one line from that file and set it to the title of the toolbar. So it's really simple, and then I just close it. And of course, this is required to be in a try catch block, or this method should be throwing IO exception, because some of these calls, basically the read line and this creation of the stream readers, can theoretically throw an IO exception, but of course, since the stuff is there in the resources, it will be always available. And in practice, we don't have that risk. But yeah, so I read this raw resource and put it as a title. And one note here related to this code, so that you must do this set title and things like that before you call the set support action bar, this toolbar variable here. It actually comes from it's already in the layout definition. And I think that is now everything in the example program that I wanted to describe and explain. So I can perhaps go to the summary slides where I
Päästetään siihen interfaceen, jos haluaisit sitä taulukseen. Tai muista nähdään sitä, kästetään. Vastasta dataa.
Yeah, well, there are two parts. So first, on this main activity, I'm implementing the interfaces here, and I'm in this case implementing 3 different interfaces. And then in the FontDialog, for example, here, yeah, we are casting it to be the interface we defined here. And of course, here we are making assumption that it actually is that interface. And I believe if you remove, for example, this statement that, okay, we are implementing this interface, I think the code will still compile. Or not. Yeah, we get some sort of error method. Yeah, it's because we also have this override thing. So this is why these are valuable. Now it tells us that, okay, this is actually not overriding anything. But perhaps now it could pass through the compiler. Yes, and it's starting here. And I think it was the, yeah, on font set. Now if I go here and try to open the dialog, the program crashes. And if we look at the run, I think we get class cast exception probably here. Yes, class cast exception. Main activity cannot be cast to the font selection listener because we didn't do that. So this line causes us the exception.
There's always useampaa kästä tässä. Ja on se järjestänyt, että voisiko se käsitellä useampaa.
Yeah, so I guess the case would be that you define either in this class, of course, you can define multiple interfaces, for example. Well, in the case you, of course, at one point you only cast it into one type, but of course you could have like two listeners and still have the same context. So you could have something like another listener is listener. I'm not sure in which case this would be. Well, like theoretically, of course, this could make sense so that you define two different interfaces which could be implemented by two different classes coming from some different sources. But in most cases, of course, yeah, it could be like if there is some support classes which the main activity, for example, creates, and those are the listeners. They could be implementing different things, but then of course you wouldn't be able to then do this in this onAttach method. You would, because this only receives one parameter, which is the parent activity. But of course you can implement a separate method for setting the listeners, which the main activity, once it has created the dialog, could call something like set bold listener, set italics listener, set font size listener, if we have some complex dialog which allows you to do lots of different things. Okay, so I have a few slides to summarize the things mentioned here. First of all, example showed time picker dialog, and of course there is also date picker dialog for user to select the date. And they have their own callback definition, so your activity which uses those must implement those interfaces on time set or on date set or something like that. And I used the alert dialog builder to build my custom dialogs, including the font selection dialog with the set items, so you can easily create those dialogs which ask the user to select between any number of options, and also do multi-selection. So in this case, this was created with the alert builder and string array type resource, so these come from the resources. And you can also, if you want to or need to, you can get the content, access the resource content yourself. These arrays, strings, other things as well. Oh yeah, this is something I missed, so maybe I go back into the thing. It's not, well, it's actually a little bit complicated piece of code, and but the core thing is rather simple. So when the NameEntryDialog opens, it does in its own start method two things, or one big thing basically. it gets the edit text, gets the text field where the user is entering the text. Here I'm declaring it final because I'm creating an anonymous class here. So when you want to access something in the anonymous class, a variable from outside of the anonymous class that must be declared final for it to be available during this part. And here it's in the edit text post method is used here. Apparently it's necessary because I believe at this point the dialog is starting, but it hasn't started properly or fully yet. And these are the things that must be done only after it has fully started. And this post method asks this text field to run this code later on once it has actually started. I just have copy pasted this code. So, yeah, you cannot just directly call, or you can directly call these methods, but they don't work. They don't do what we want them to do. So first, and this you could do without this post thing, request focus. So this request the component to receive the focus in case of the text entry field. It basically means that the cursor starts blinking on that text entry field. But then the second part is you get this input method manager, which you get from this get context and get system service part and be giving it a constant value input method service. And if we did get the input method manager, we can ask it to show soft input. So soft input means those virtual keyboards on screen, as opposed to hard input, meaning having a physical keyboard or a mouse. So I ask it to show soft input on this edit text, and then you need to provide the parameter, and this show implicit is apparently what needs to be done here. So because of these couple of lines of code, which basically you can just copy and paste, needed when we start the dialog, we automatically get the virtual keyboard. Without those lines of code, it would just open the dialog, and the cursor wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't have the virtual keyboard open by default. It would work, but it would be maybe, this is a little bit more user-friendly. Of course, you shouldn't always maybe be doing this, but in this case, I think it makes sense. So yeah, using the input method manager, we automatically open the virtual keyboard. Then I use the time picker dialog. Its callback is this on time set, and you get the hour and minute that were selected as integers. And it's time picker dialog dot on time set listener that you must be implementing. Layout is regular constraint layout. Then we have the well, nested scroll view for this bottom area, and inside it we have image view here and text view here. And in this is a toolbar, and inside the toolbar is the radio group with the radio buttons in. And I haven't done anything about the layout. Basically, you get that more or less automatically. Menu items have been marked checkable, and if you have these checkable items, you must manually manage them. Call set checked when it should change. And typeface class can be used to adjust the font of any component which has text. Just create method, create a new font, and set typeface to, for example, in text view to change the typeface. Then resources. You can add a raw type resource directory if you need to use files which are not by default supported types of resources. If you are doing something which is supported, of course, you want to use the layouts and drawables and values and menus parts there. Okay, some funny non-grammatical text here, but yeah, in the raw resources you can put anything in there, and you can get access to the input stream. And if it's a text resource, you can use readers, and it's binary, and read the stream directly. It's just regular Java classes, nothing Android specific about those. You can just drag files into this part of into different resource folders, images into drawable, and well, anything into the raw, basically. Most of the other things are something that you probably need to or want to create in the Android Studio. And if you want to add the raw directory, right-click on the resources, find new Android resource directory, and then from resource type, find option raw. And then when you click OK, then you get the raw directory. Yeah, this is a little bit of the XML. So there is radio group and radio buttons inside it. And at least I have so far always had to do this, basically editing the XML manually, which is not too hard. You can maybe drag the items first in there and then organize them in the XML necessary. And also the on-click, these parts I had to manually write in here. But as I said, the autofill or code completion works in these XML files pretty perfectly. Suggesting also the methods names that can be called. And I used the nested scroll view here, and if you just drag in a nested scroll view into your design, you get the linear layout underneath it automatically, and underneath it you can add your own components. And then it should be scrolling if the content is longer than the visible area. But yeah, the scroll views should have only one child, and the linear layout is usually what you can use, and it's the default value. And I think that's everything about this example, which hopefully illustrates all the aspects relevant to the third set of exercises.